inside the shadows of Goulburn Supermax. Before we dive into the darkest corners of Australia's most feared prison, smash that subscribe button, hit like, and leave a comment. Because what you're about to witness will leave you questioning everything you think you know about life behind bars. The sky over Goulburn was a heavy iron gray, reflecting the weight that pressed down on every brick and steel beam of the Supermax facility. From the outside, it seemed like any high-security prison: cold concrete walls, razor-sharp fencing, and guard towers that loomed like silent sentinels. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the fortress revealed its true nature, a place where human freedom had been stripped to its barest form, and where the mind itself became the prisoner. Inside the main complex, Officer Jackson moved through the silent corridors like a shadow, the echo of his boots the only sound that dared disturb the stillness. Each cell was a windowless world of isolation. Inmates spent 23 hours a day confined in these concrete tombs, with only a small slit of light from the ceiling to mark the passage of time. In some cases, prisoners went decades without physical contact beyond the occasional handover of meals or legal documents. In this darkness, human behavior warped. Every glance, every word, or the absence of words, held meaning. Inmates developed routines that outsiders could never comprehend. Some meticulously cleaned the floor tiles with toothbrushes, counting the scrubbing motions like a ritual to stave off madness. Others drew imaginary lines on the walls, mapping the minutes into hours, hours into days. But Goulburn was more than just isolation. The Supermax was designed to contain Australia's most violent, most unrepentant criminals, men whose crimes had shocked the nation, men who had shattered lives, terrorized communities, and in some cases, even killed other inmates inside lower security facilities. Here, the stakes were life and death every second, and the guards understood the delicate balance. One mistake, one lapse, could trigger disaster. Detective Sarah Lawson, a seasoned criminal investigator, had spent years studying the behavioral patterns of high-security inmates. She had been called to Goulburn to consult on a new case, an inexplicable attack that had left one inmate critically injured despite the strictest containment protocols. She recalled her first walk-through vividly. The faint smell of disinfectant masked something far more sinister beneath: the fear, the tension, and a sense that the walls themselves were alive, listening, judging. Lawson's focus was on a particular inmate, known inside Goulburn as the Architect. His real name was never publicized. His crimes were too gruesome, too meticulously calculated. He was a man who thrived in control, even in confinement, manipulating the environment and those around him. Surveillance footage showed him standing silently in his cell, rocking slightly back and forth, eyes fixed on a point on the ceiling. But the attack had proven something terrifying. Even here, inside Australia's most secure prison, he had influence. He could orchestrate chaos with a subtle glance or a whispered code. Across the corridor, Officer Jackson's radio crackled. A minor disturbance, they said, but in Supermax, nothing was ever minor. A new prisoner had arrived, classified as high risk. These were the inmates that even seasoned officers feared, the ones who tested the boundaries of isolation and sanity. Every step, every decision in the processing area was calculated to prevent a disaster. The new prisoner's eyes darted from the cameras to the floor, scanning the corridors, calculating escape routes that didn't exist. The first night in Goulburn Supermax could break a man. The ceiling lights buzzed overhead, a mechanical hum that was almost hypnotic. Inmates were allowed only the bare essentials: a mattress, a toilet, and a metal table bolted to the floor. Conversations were forbidden. The echo of a single shout could reverberate like an alarm. The new inmate, a man nicknamed Coyote by the guards, banged his fists against the cold steel walls, a desperate attempt to assert his presence, to fight the creeping despair. But isolation at Goulburn did more than suppress physical action. It attacked the mind. Psychologists had long warned about the effects: hallucinations, paranoia, self-harm, and the deterioration of memory. Some inmates went weeks, even months, forgetting the sound of human voices. Others began speaking to imaginary companions or arguing silently with the walls. The Supermax was an environment designed not just to contain the body, but to challenge the limits of the psyche itself. Detective Lawson examined the security footage from the past 6 months. Patterns emerged, subtle but unmistakable. Prisoners with no contact with the outside world began developing behavioral signals, tapping rhythms on the floor, arranging bedding in repetitive patterns, staring for hours at blank walls. "It's like a form of language," she noted to her team. "A way to communicate without words, to claim some control over the uncontrollable." Meanwhile, back in his cell, the architect observed the new inmate. He recognized the signs, the jittery energy, the fearful glance at shadows. And he knew how to exploit them. In the sterile, echoing corridors of Supermax, influence was currency. And the architect had mastered it. A flicker of light from a small, grated window, the slightest movement of a guard down the hall. He cataloged it all, storing strategies for manipulation, waiting for the moment when chaos could serve him. The following morning, an alarm went off. Coyote had tried to reach another inmate cell, a breach of the rules that could have triggered a violent confrontation. Officers quickly intervened, but the ripple effect had begun. Across the facility, guards noticed subtle signs of agitation, tapping, pacing, and eye contact that seemed almost purposeful. Somewhere in the labyrinth of concrete and steel, a plan was forming. The investigation deepened. Lawson interviewed officers, analyzed behavioral patterns, and documented the anomalies. The Supermax was designed for control, yet even here, human cunning and desperation found a way to assert itself. The architect's influence spread like a virus, quiet, invisible, yet undeniably powerful. And as Lawson watched, she realized the horrifying truth. The prison itself became a chessboard, and the inmates were playing a game that most would never understand. By the end of the week, the tension reached a breaking point. Inmates who had been quiet, compliant for years, began to act unpredictably. Doors slammed, alarms buzzed, and the Supermax staff worked tirelessly to maintain order. The new inmate Coyote had survived his first days, but he was already marked, not just by guards, but by the invisible network of psychological power wielded by the architect. Then, the shocking discovery came. Hidden beneath a floor panel in one of the common areas, an area supposedly under constant surveillance, investigators found evidence of a plan far more elaborate than anyone had imagined. Maps, notes, even coded messages suggested that the architect had been orchestrating contact between isolated inmates, a network of communication that defied the prison's strictest security measures. Lawson's blood ran cold. "This isn't just a prison break," she whispered. "It's a mental war." The realization was chilling. Goulburn Supermax, Australia's fortress of isolation and security, was not impervious. Inmates were finding ways to manipulate, to connect, to influence each other. And in doing so, they were challenging everything the system was built to enforce. As night fell again over the high walls of Goulburn, the echoing footsteps of guards and the distant clanging of doors underscored a grim truth. The battle for control was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, the architect smiled silently. And Detective Lawson knew this was only the beginning. Because when they opened the floor panel, what they found wasn't just evidence of rule-breaking. It was proof that even in the world's most secure prison, the human mind could not be contained. And that, my viewers, is just the beginning of the story. Hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you want to see how this mental war escalates inside Australia's most feared prison. The mental battlefield of Goulburn Supermax. Before we dive deeper, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment, because what happens inside these walls is beyond anything most people could imagine. And the secrets we uncover today will change how you see incarceration forever. The morning light filtered through the narrow slits of Goulburn Supermax, a faint reminder of the world outside, a world that most of the inmates would never see again. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of disinfectant and the faint undertone of fear. Every corridor, every corner felt alive, as though the concrete itself was observing the humans trapped within it. Detective Sarah Lawson arrived early, her mind still racing from the discovery of the hidden floor panel. The notes, maps, and coded messages suggested that the architect wasn't just manipulating isolated inmates. He had established a psychological network, a clandestine system that allowed prisoners to communicate and influence one another, all under the noses of the guards. It was a level of sophistication that even seasoned law enforcement officers had never encountered. As she walked the corridors with Officer Jackson, the stark reality of life inside the Supermax became impossible to ignore. Cells stretched like tunnels into infinity, each housing a human mind teetering on the brink of collapse. Inmates were forbidden from speaking, yet the silence was deceptive. Every subtle movement, every glance, every pattern of behavior conveyed meaning. Some inmates tapped out rhythms on the floor tiles. Others arranged their bedding with meticulous precision. These weren't just habits. They were messages, codes, lifelines in a world stripped of normal human interaction. Coyote, the new inmate, had begun to understand this world, but barely. The first night had left him exhausted, physically intact but mentally fragile. He paced his cell, muttering to himself, trying to remember what life had been like outside. The architect watched him silently from across the corridor, a predator assessing prey. In the absence of light and sound, influence became power, and the architect had mastered it. By midweek, subtle disturbances began to ripple across the facility. A cell door slammed unexpectedly. An alarm buzzed briefly, then stopped. Inmates who had been compliant for years began exhibiting unpredictable behaviors, tapping sequences on walls, pacing in tight circles, and staring at guards with an intensity that sent chills down their spines. These were not random acts. They were orchestrated, a psychological symphony conducted by the architect. Lawson interviewed guards who had spent decades inside the facility. One officer, a veteran known simply as Harris, spoke in low, measured tones. "You think you control this place," he said. "You think these walls keep them in. But they're in here too, controlling each other, controlling us. You watch for violence, but the real war, it's in their minds." The discovery of the hidden floor panel had triggered a comprehensive sweep of the facility. Investigators found scraps of paper, coded messages, and even rudimentary maps that detailed interactions between inmates. It was clear the architect had been recruiting others into his network, subtly testing their loyalty and obedience. Some had refused, withdrawing deeper into isolation. Others had embraced it, finding purpose in the mental chess game he orchestrated. Coyote became a focal point. The architect's subtle manipulations drew him into the network. At first, it was small, an arrangement of bedding, a rhythm of taps, a coded gesture from across the hall. But soon, Coyote realized that even the tiniest action could be a signal, a message with consequences that rippled across the entire wing. He struggled to comprehend the depth of control, the invisible threads that connected inmates despite years of solitary confinement. Meanwhile, Lawson and her team analyzed the behavioral patterns. They realized that Goulburn Supermax, designed to break bodies, could not fully break the mind. Instead, it forced the mind to evolve, to adapt in ways unimaginable. In the absence of normal social interaction, inmates developed alternative forms of communication, visual codes, rhythmic patterns, gestures, and even subtle postures that conveyed messages across cells. The network wasn't just about survival. It was about power, influence, and control within a system designed to strip humanity away. As days passed, tension inside the prison escalated. Officers reported more anomalies. An inmate refusing to eat, another staring at the same wall for hours, and a third moving bedding in patterns that mirrored the codes found in the architect's notes. Even with cameras and constant surveillance, the system could not capture the full scope of what was happening. The human mind, it seemed, could always find a way. One night, a critical incident occurred. Coyote attempted to communicate directly with another inmate using the coded sequences. Guards intervened, but the act demonstrated that the architect's influence was spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Lawson realized that the network wasn't just about survival. It was a psychological experiment, a test of how far the human mind could adapt under extreme conditions. The investigation took a new turn when surveillance footage revealed subtle gestures among inmates that had previously gone unnoticed. A tap on a wall here, a shifted mattress there. These were deliberate, strategic actions designed to maintain the network. The architect's reach extended across the wing, influencing behavior, predicting movements, and shaping interactions. It was a form of control invisible to the casual observer, but undeniable to those paying attention. Lawson convened a meeting with prison psychologists and behavioral analysts. They discussed the implications. "This is beyond rebellion," one expert said. "It's a new form of communication, a mental ecosystem. The prison can confine the body, but the mind, it adapts." Officer Jackson described the atmosphere during the night shifts. "You feel it. The silence isn't empty, it's alive. You see glances, shifts in posture, a tapping sequence that makes no sense until you realize it's all part of a pattern. They're not just surviving, they're communicating, influencing, even plotting. It's terrifying and brilliant at the same time." Lawson and her team began mapping the network, trying to anticipate the next moves. But every discovery led to more questions. How many inmates were involved? How long had this network been active? And most importantly, what could they be planning next? Then a breakthrough. Hidden inside a ceiling panel in one of the older wings, investigators found additional notes, detailed psychological profiles, observations of guard routines, and even diagrams illustrating patterns of movement within the prison. It became clear that the architect had not only been orchestrating inmate behavior, but studying the guards as well, exploiting weaknesses, and planning interventions that could destabilize the facility. Coyote, now fully aware of the network's depth, faced a moral dilemma. Should he participate fully, embracing the mental chess game, or withdraw and risk being isolated, potentially targeted by both the guards and the inmates? The decision weighed on him, a constant reminder of the psychological warfare that defined life inside Goulburn Supermax. The days stretched into weeks. The facility remained outwardly calm, but underneath, tension simmered. Every tap, every glance, every subtle movement carried meaning. The architect's influence extended across wings, affecting behavior, dictating routines, and even shaping decisions that could determine life or death within the prison. By the end of the month, the full scope of the network was undeniable. The architect had created a psychological web that connected inmates despite isolation, a silent, invisible force that challenged the very purpose of the Supermax. Lawson realized that the prison, designed to break the human spirit, had inadvertently created a system that amplified it, fostering ingenuity, resilience, and influence in the most unlikely of circumstances. Then, the most chilling discovery came. In a secure storage room, investigators found a series of letters, not sent, not received, but carefully preserved. They detailed the thoughts of the architect, his strategies, his observations of other inmates, and most disturbingly, his plans for extending the network beyond the walls of Goulburn. The mind of one inmate had become a force capable of reshaping the environment, even under extreme confinement. Lawson's voice was calm but intense as she reviewed the materials. "This isn't just about survival anymore," she said. "It's about control, influence, and the human capacity to adapt to even the harshest conditions. And if we underestimate it, we will be caught off guard." As night fell over Goulburn once again, the guards patrolled the silent corridors, unaware of the invisible threads connecting the inmates. Inside their cells, men like the architect and Coyote plotted, observed, and communicated in ways that defied expectation. The psychological battlefield had expanded, and the Supermax, despite its fortress-like construction, had become a theater for mental warfare. Detective Lawson left the facility, her mind racing with implications. The investigation was far from over. The network had not been dismantled, and the prisoners had learned to adapt faster than the authorities could respond. The architect's game was evolving, and the consequences were only beginning to emerge. And that, my viewers, is the terrifying reality of life inside Goulburn Supermax. What you've seen today is only part of the story. Chapter 3 will reveal the shocking climax of this psychological war, the consequences of extreme isolation, and the lengths some men will go to maintain control in a world designed to break them. The shocking truth behind the walls. Before we step inside the final chapter, remember, if you've been captivated by the psychological maze of Goulburn Supermax so far, smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment. What we're about to uncover will reveal the ultimate consequences of life under total control and extreme isolation, and it's not for the faint of heart. The sun barely touched the horizon as Detective Sarah Lawson returned to the facility for the final phase of the investigation. Weeks of surveillance, mapping inmate networks, and analyzing psychological profiles had culminated in this moment. The hidden panel, the coded messages, the invisible influence of the architect, they all pointed toward one terrifying truth. Goulburn Supermax was more than a prison. It was a psychological laboratory, and the inmates were both subjects and participants in an ongoing, intricate experiment in control, manipulation, and survival. Coyote, the new recruit into the architect's network, had been observed for weeks. He had adapted rapidly, but his adaptation came at a cost. Sleep-deprived and constantly vigilant, his behavior mirrored the rhythms of the prison itself. Subtle tics, repetitive pacing, and coded tapping on cell walls were all manifestations of the mental strain that isolation imposed. Yet, these actions also strengthened the network, reinforcing the architect's reach. Lawson's team had prepared for a coordinated intervention to uncover the full extent of the network, but the facility itself seemed to resist them. Inmates moved in patterns too complex for casual observation. Routine patrols, mealtimes, and recreational periods became stages for silent, coded communication. The architect's influence was omnipresent, yet invisible, like a spider weaving a web across the cell blocks. The breakthrough came when a new set of surveillance feeds revealed something astonishing: a hidden hierarchy within the inmate population. Coyote and a few others acted as intermediaries, transmitting instructions and cues from the architect. They weren't just surviving, they were controlling behavior across the prison, shaping interactions, subtly challenging authority, and even predicting guard responses. It was an ecosystem of control that no one had anticipated. One night, a violent confrontation erupted, seemingly without cause. An inmate lunged at a guard during routine checks, triggering a lockdown. At first glance, it appeared to be an isolated incident, but analysis revealed a carefully orchestrated sequence. The action was a diversion, a calculated move by the architect to test the limits of the prison's security protocols. Guards were forced to adapt on the fly, revealing vulnerabilities in even the most rigidly controlled environment. Lawson realized that what they were witnessing was more than rebellion. It was evolution. The Supermax was designed to break spirits, yet in doing so, it had unintentionally fostered a system of ingenuity, adaptation, and communication among its inmates. The very architecture intended to isolate had become a crucible, forging complex networks of psychological survival. The deeper the investigation went, the more unsettling the discoveries became. Hidden caches of notes, diagrams, and coded patterns revealed the level of foresight and planning the architect had achieved. Each action, each gesture, each subtle behavioral cue was deliberate. Guards who thought they controlled the prison were, in reality, participants in an intricate psychological play, manipulated without their awareness. Coyote's role had become critical. As one of the intermediaries, he faced an ethical dilemma. Should he continue aiding the architect, expanding the network's reach, or should he withdraw, risking isolation and potential retaliation from both inmates and the system itself? His internal struggle mirrored the broader conflict at the heart of Goulburn Supermax, the battle between human resilience and the oppressive environment designed to crush it. Meanwhile, Lawson uncovered evidence of deeper, more disturbing layers of control. Some inmates had been quietly documenting guard routines, recording responses to various triggers, and even noting subtle psychological weaknesses. The network wasn't merely about communication, it was about influence, prediction, and power, all executed within the constraints of a facility designed to eliminate it. The investigators decided to conduct a controlled experiment. They attempted to disrupt the network, altering routines, and isolating suspected intermediaries. What happened next was alarming. inmates reacted in unexpected ways. Tapping sequences intensified, movements became synchronized across wings, and even seemingly isolated prisoners responded to subtle cues. It was clear that the architect's influence extended further than anyone had imagined. The climax arrived when the team identified the final piece of the puzzle, a hidden floor compartment containing extensive notes, psychological analyses, and coded plans. These weren't just observations, they were blueprints for control, meticulously detailing how to exploit the environment, the guards, and other inmates. The architect had anticipated nearly every contingency, and the realization sent chills through the entire investigative team. Coyote, confronted with the materials, understood the gravity of the situation. The network he had become a part of wasn't merely a survival strategy. It was a system designed to endure, adapt, and extend itself beyond the walls. The ethical and psychological implications were staggering. Here was a human mind, operating under extreme confinement, yet capable of orchestrating influence that transcended traditional barriers. The final revelation came when Lawson and her team connected the network's reach to past incidents within the facility. Sudden fights, unexplained compliance patterns, and even subtle shifts in guard behavior. What had previously seemed random or isolated was, in fact, a carefully coordinated orchestration. The Supermax was not only housing dangerous individuals, it was a stage for a complex experiment in human psychology, executed by those it intended to confine. In the aftermath, the prison remained outwardly unchanged. Guards continued their routines, inmates remained in their cells, and the walls of Goulburn Supermax stood imposing and silent. Yet, beneath the surface, the psychological web persisted. The architect's influence had been documented, understood, and partially disrupted, but the legacy of control and adaptation remained. Lawson left the facility, reflecting on the implications. Goulburn Supermax was more than a maximum security prison. It was a testament to the resilience of the human mind, the adaptability of social networks, and the unpredictable consequences of extreme isolation. What was intended as a system of absolute control had revealed the complexities of human behavior, highlighting that even in the harshest conditions, the mind seeks connection, influence, and survival. The story concluded with a final chilling observation. Despite the walls, the guards, and the isolation, the inmates had created a world of their own making, governed by invisible rules, subtle signals, and the enduring influence of the architect. It was a system that operated silently, efficiently, and in many ways beyond human comprehension. And so, the truth of Goulburn Supermax remained a fortress of isolation, a battleground for the mind, and a testament to human adaptability. The walls may confine bodies, but the mind finds a way. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the full depth of what happens behind the world's most secure prison walls. Hit subscribe, like, and comment to join us for more shocking, true crime explorations you won't find anywhere else.